Somewhere between action and thought lies the flow state. It is experienced by musicians, sports people, and accountants. Today, we're going to play a game that will lull you into flow state, and then kick you the fuck out of it. My name's T, and today, we're playing Welcome to the future. Or at least, the future according to now long-dead game developer Psygnosis. Wipeout 2096 was released for the Sony PlayStation in 1996 and sponsored by Red Bull. Like all the best games, Wipeout's story consists of 2 paragraphs of text in the manual. 1. Anti-gravity tech was invented in 2035. 2. 63 years later, we are using this technology to do some racing. I know you're here for video games, not poetry, but allow me to read you this excerpt. Never dwell on past days. Leave those damp brown days alone. Our future has more colour, more speed, more noise. Our future has more. Free yourself. Titillating yet understatedly dystopian. And
brought to you by Red Bull.
Oh, one more thing before we talk about gameplay. Wipeout 2097 has an absolutely epic soundtrack. See, unlike its inferior competitor, the Sony PlayStation came equipped with CD-ROM. This means it could play music much like any other CD player. It was even possible with some games to take the disc out while the game was running and swap it with one from your own music collection and continue playing with a custom soundtrack. Now that's cool. Wipeout 2097's OST is made up of drum and bass legends, the Chemical Brothers, the Prodigy, and even Daft Punk. Unfortunately for you, dear viewer, you will not be able to experience this. Wipeout 2097 asks us to free ourselves, but we may not free ourselves from copyright claims. So I ask you, dear viewer, to settle in for an evening of offensive, royalty-free drum and bass. Well, kid, you made it this far. It's time to talk about gameplay. When you first boot up Wipeout 2097, you need to select a mode. The arcade mode, where you'll spend most of the game, the time trial mode, which is completely pointless, and the two-player modes, which inexcusably require a second PS1 console. Next, you will select which team to race for. This is essentially picking the vehicle that you will race in. Team Facer for low speed and good handling, suitable for the new player, all the way through to Team Directs for the experienced players, fast yet substantially harder to handle. Finally, you need to select your track. The tracks in Wipeout are all incredibly cool. Despite their futuristic aesthetic, they all have the feel of actual race courses. This is partially because Wipeout's controls are inspired by F1 racing. Similar to how F1 cars can brake with each wheel independently, your ship is equipped with air brakes that will allow you to brake specifically on the left or right hand side of the vehicle. This means that if you time it correctly, you can make turns at incredibly high speeds. This is quite simply exhilarating. And here's a bonus tip. I recorded the gameplay for this video in third person because it is more interesting to look at. However, this game should be played in first person mode, as you will feel that speed even more keenly. The stages in Wipeout are split into 3 classes: Vector, Venom, and Rapier, ranging from easy to very difficult. Vector races are almost trivial. You will conquer them pretty easily, and they mostly exist to acclimatize the player to the game. The next class up is Venom, which are adequately described as tricky. This is where the boys become men, the women become slightly older women, and the pensioners become happy yet distant memories of a life well lived. I managed to place bronze after a few tries, but I struggled to break gold. That was until I discovered that the early vehicles in this game are more or less obsolete immediately. If you want to compete, you will have to master the Directs. The good news is, fast and technical is where this game really shines. With the Venom levels dispatched, it was time to settle in and take on Rapier, the last 2 levels of the game. Gar o Europa, a cross between a city skyline and a train station with sharp turns and chicanes worthy of the Monaco Grand Prix. And, on the other hand, Odessa Keys, the cross between a ferry terminal and that city skyline's less attractive brother. That has some sick jumps. We'll come back to the sick jumps. Through struggle, skill, and a little bit of autopilot, the game is finally over. Or not. You see, WIPEOUT2097 throws us a curveball. All of this was the appetizer, a qualifier for a qualifier. Now you have to beat all the 6 tracks on Rapier difficulty consecutively in order to unlock Wipeout 2097's true difficulty level, Phantom. This is an awesome twist. And now, for what isn't awesome. In case you didn't get the hint, it's the weapons. The weapons in Wipeout are really, really bad. In fact, every weapon in Wipeout 2097 feels as though it was designed to be as poorly implemented as humanly possible. This is typified by the autopilot feature. The autopilot feature will automatically direct you around the track at high speeds, which sounds incredibly advantageous. However, there are 2 fatal flaws. Fatal flaw number 1 is that you still take damage and are unable to make evasive maneuvers, meaning that it's possible to be destroyed and there's nothing you can do about it. Second, and perhaps even worse, is that the autopilot will almost certainly disengage you into an oncoming wall. This means that any advantage you've got from using it is very quickly swindled away. This may sound like lazy game design, however, it's worse than that. It's borderline malicious. You see, the autopilot isn't activated for a certain amount of time, rather it is designed to disengage at specific points in the track. This means that the designers chose exactly where the autopilot would disengage. Every collision was a conscious decision by the designer. Even if you slam on both of your brakes, it is impossible to avoid, meaning that the designers wanted you to crash. This is simply unforgivable. Why on earth would you design a feature like this? It gets worse from here. The speed boost is so fast that you either have to save it for very specific straights on the course, brake immediately after using it, or lose complete control of your vehicle. The earthquake completely obscures the track ahead of you, meaning that unless you have timed it perfectly or have memorized the track, it is likely to do more damage to you than to your opponent. Even the missile, the stock weapon of every arcade racer, is completely flawed. You see, like you, your opponents are physical objects trying to take the most efficient line through the racecourse. Striking your opponent with a missile will bring them to a dead halt. Therefore, 90% of the time you score a hit, you are likely to rear-end your opponent, also bringing you to a screeching stop. Even if this isn't the case, you will have to change your course to a less efficient line. Either way, your flow is ruined. The weapons in Wipeout 2097 speak to the identity crisis at the core of its design. It cannot decide whether to be a technical racing sim with a cyberpunk aesthetic or an arcade racer with a cyberpunk aesthetic. Cast your mind back to those sick jumps I described earlier in the video. If you accelerate too quickly over this particular jump, your ship will bounce so high it will collide with the ceiling of the following tunnel. Tell me, why does an anti-gravity ship need to bounce? And while we're on the subject, why does an anti-gravity ship accelerate while going downhill? None of these things make sense. If you want to make a wacky space arcade racer, then make a wacky space arcade racer. If you want to make an F1 game, make an F1 game. Oh.
I'm sure there was contact there. He forces his way through.
Alright, chat, my name's Daniel Ricciardo, and when I grow up I want to be the best racer in F1, and that's why today we're playing F1 on the Sony PlayStation 1. And actually it's a pretty good, it's an alright game, innit? So don't forget to like and subscribe.
In the original title to this video, I was going to refer to Wipeout 2097 as the most underrated racing game on the PlayStation 1. However, this is simply not the case. Wipeout both reviewed and sold incredibly well back when it was released in 1996. It is more as though Wipeout has been forgotten. It sits on a vector between Crash Team Racing and Gran Turismo. Its lack of focus makes it, unfortunately, forgettable. For what it's worth, Wipeout 2097 is a good game, whatever that means. After playing, I took an active interest in F1 racing, which can only speak to the passion and dedication of Psygnosis in capturing that feeling in video game form. Psygnosis no longer exists as a developer. It has no employees and exists merely to make legal filings as a subsidiary of Sony. A fate worse than death, a sacrifice on the altar of that brighter, faster, noisier future it so poetically praised and feared. Our future has more. Free yourself, dear viewer. Also, drink Red Bull.